Welcome to the world of Mark's Money Mind, coming to you this week from Down Under. I am your host, Mark Troutman. This educational, personal finance show combines money lessons, timely topics, personal stories, and community wisdom to help listeners and viewers master their finances to enjoy a stress-free life of financial freedom. I'm recording this episode from the cruise ship Silver Nova, just off the coast of Australia, at our first port of call in Shute Harbor. I will be traveling with some fellow slackers around Australia and New Zealand for the next 30 days aboard this ship. So hopefully these episodes will come through loud and clear, and I don't have any issues with uploading the episodes, but if that's the case, please bear with me. I'm doing my best recording while I am traveling around. So what is on my mind this week? Well, I've recently had some discussions with some people who have been laid off from their jobs, so I thought it would be appropriate to do an episode on the things to do if that happens to you or someone you know. So this is going to be a pretty brief episode, but just some of the things to think about if a job interruption occurs to you or someone you know. So some of the topics I'm going to touch on are severance, continuation of health coverage, and money matters as it relates to this. So the first one is severance. Many companies will offer a severance package of some type. Often it comes in the form of something like 2 weeks of pay for every year of service. If it's a large layoff across a number of people at an employer, frequently they may offer a slightly sweetened package, so maybe 4 weeks per year or something to that effect. So it's very important to review the severance package that you receive. You're probably not going to have much in the way of negotiating power and changing anything, but before you sign that agreement, because typically you need to sign the agreement in order to receive the payment under that severance agreement, you want to make sure you understand all of the terms and what you're signing, right? And sometimes they'll have things like non-competes, which I think is completely inappropriate. For example, if you have a non-compete, yet it wasn't your choice to leave the company. So unfortunately, sometimes they will have those in there. I'm not sure how well those could be held up in a court of law if an employer were to terminate you and wouldn't allow you to seek employment. That just doesn't seem reasonable to me. So I'm not so sure courts would stand by those companies to allow them to have that non-compete in there, or at least hold you accountable to that. But that's something to be aware of. You do want to understand what the dollar amounts involved are, how you're going to receive that payment, if it's going to be a lump sum or if you're going to remain on the payroll for a period of time. Also, the health insurance situation is important to understand. There's a federal law called COBRA, which is the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, most commonly referred to as COBRA, which is a federal law that requires employers with 20 or more employees to provide continued health coverage in the group plan. Now, that does not mean that they will continue to pay for that coverage, but they must offer it to you, and you can then choose to pay the amount, not only what you had been paying, but also the employer's portion, which can be significantly more than the employee portion, plus a small administrative fee, usually in the neighborhood of about 2%, and some employers don't even charge that extra amount. But it could be quite costly to have that continuation of coverage under COBRA. Now, what's interesting about COBRA is you have 60 days to enroll in that once your employer-sponsored benefits end. So let's say you received severance, and it may include health coverage for the period of time that your severance covers. So let's say you got 8 weeks of severance, let's say 2 months. They may continue your health coverage through that 2 months, especially if they're paying you through the payroll system. And then after that 2-month period, you may have to either elect COBRA or get your own insurance or go uninsured, which I certainly would not recommend anyone do. But what's interesting about COBRA is you have 60 days to enroll in it. And even if your enrollment is delayed, you will be covered retroactively to the starting date your prior coverage ended. So what some people may choose to do is say, especially healthy people that are not using ongoing health services, for example, they may say, hey, you know what? I am not going to elect the coverage immediately, but if I get sick within the next 60 days, I will then elect it. It will go retroactive and I will be covered. Maybe in that 60-day window, you'll have found a new job, or maybe you will go on the Affordable Care Act, for example. Now we're in the month of November. So some people, let's say you were laid off here in the fourth quarter or in the last 2 months of the year, you could say, I'm going to enroll in the Affordable Care Act or ACA, whether it's through healthcare.gov or your state's option. For example, in Colorado, we have the Connect for Health Colorado portal, which is in lieu of healthcare.gov. And for those in Colorado, the website is connectforhealthco.com. And you could enroll for, let's say, January 1st and have your coverage start on January 1st. And the benefit of that is that, let's say you've already gone through a good portion of your deductible, you may want to elect to have used COBRA in the last 2 months of the year, for example, if you had a health event, because maybe you've already satisfied your deductible, and then go on the ACA starting in January, for example. So that's something to be aware of. The open enrollment period is November 1st through December 15th, but there are exceptions where you can enroll outside of the open enrollment, and change of employment status is one of those. So you could enroll outside the open enrollment period if you had a change of employment status. So that's healthcare. Certainly very important to make sure your health coverage continues, whether it's through COBRA or a new plan or a new employer. So definitely be aware of what your options are there and make sure you have health coverage. Now let's get to some of the money matters. One of the things certainly to consider is applying for unemployment benefits through your state. You can enroll in your state's unemployment program. And even if they won't start right away, for example, because you're receiving a severance, you might as well go ahead and enroll so that it starts as soon as those severance payments end or your payments through your company are complete. So usually unemployment cannot be paid or will not be paid if you're receiving some form of severance, but once that severance ends, the unemployment benefits will kick in. And investigate your state's program to see what the requirements are to receive unemployment benefits. Typically, you have to show that you are actively seeking employment. You can't just sit on the couch and receive unemployment benefits. And there are certain elements that are required. You may have to meet with someone on occasion or have a telephone call or fill out a form that shows that you're actively seeking employment. So make sure you understand all the rules and regulations around those unemployment benefit programs. But it can really take a strain off your finances receiving those unemployment benefits. So I highly recommend applying for those. That's what they're there for. Don't feel ashamed of accepting them. That is what that system is for. And then we've talked about an emergency fund previously on this podcast. This is when an emergency fund is very useful. That's why you saved money in your emergency fund for situations just as this. So don't be afraid to spend money in your emergency fund within reason, because that is why you saved it up to begin with, for these unexpected situations. Then the other thing, obviously, to do is to look at your spending and determine what will stay and what may go. You may want to scale back on some of the discretionary expenses and really look at your spending so you can string out those severance payments and your emergency fund as long as possible while you're looking for new opportunities out there. And then the other things to consider are, if you had a 401k plan at work, it may make sense to roll that out to an IRA at a custodian of your choice, Ones that come to mind are companies like Fidelity, Charles Schwab, Vanguard, some of the low-cost providers out there. I don't have any affiliations with any of those, but those are typically your kind of the big three low-cost brokerage firms. So if you already have an IRA, you could roll it into that IRA if it's the same type, traditional or Roth, or you could open up a new rollover IRA and move that 401k over. Typically, you're going to have to contact your employer and have that 401k moved over to your custodian. The other thing to consider is that if your balance is relatively small in your 401k plan, if you don't roll it over, some companies will literally just cash you out if you don't move that by a certain date. So hopefully that will be in your summary plan documents at your 401k that you can review to see what those requirements are. Some companies, if it's less than $1,000 or $5,000, they're just going to cash you out and send you a check, and that's going to be a taxable event and subject to a 10% penalty. So you certainly don't want to do that. You really would want to consider rolling that over to a new custodian. Also, if you had an HSA, health savings account, you may want to consider rolling that out to a custodian. I personally use Fidelity for my HSA custodian. I find them to be very good. Obviously, there are other custodians out there. You may want to consider moving that HSA out of your employer benefit program or whoever is custodying that employer benefit program to another institution, especially if you already have one established somewhere else and you can consolidate it. And then, depending on your severance and your emergency fund runway, I would consider using this time to really consider your best options going forward. Sometimes we're blindsided by a termination or a layoff, and you're thinking like, what did I do wrong? What happened? Why did this happen to me? Woe is me. It's nothing that you can change at this point. So look at it as an opportunity to forge a new path. And sometimes these things, while they're very difficult to manage as they happen, often they can be a blessing in disguise, I guess you would say. Frequently, I see people end up getting better opportunities, opening their eyes to new possibilities. So you may want to consider pivoting to a new or better career path, for example. So I would just suggest looking, and this kind of evolves from the discussion I had on the last podcast with Alan and Katie Donegan. Look at the target you're aiming for and look forward to that and plan for that. Looking in the past and worrying about or thinking about things that you can't control that have already happened is really not worth your attention and focus. Focus on the future, things that are within your control, and good things could very well happen as a result of this. Yes, it's a difficult time, but I find frequently that these events often lead to even better opportunities going forward. So this was a relatively brief episode. It was just something that was on my mind. I've had a few conversations with people that are in this situation and some people that have already gone through this situation in the past and actually have come out at the better end post this period. So I can relay that to anyone who's currently in this situation, that oftentimes, while it appears to be a difficult and trying circumstance currently, frequently good things can come from it, especially if you have an open mind and a positive outlook. Things can turn out well. But again, to summarize, read the severance package, understand all of the terms. You're going to need to sign it in order to receive that severance. So make sure you understand what is in the severance package. Think about how you're going to have healthcare coverage going forward, whether you're going to immediately take COBRA or delay COBRA with the understanding that you have 60 days to enroll, potentially go to the Affordable Care Act instead. Oftentimes I find a lot of people will choose COBRA just because it's kind of the easy button, but in hindsight, wish they had switched to the Affordable Care Act instead, and I would say oftentimes has better coverage. or at least equivalent coverage for a much lower cost. And if for some reason it takes a while to find new employment, you may receive a pretty hefty subsidy as a result of being on the Affordable Care Act, something that you wouldn't get if you chose COBRA. And then the simple money matters: apply for the unemployment benefits, use that emergency fund that you diligently saved up, look at your spending, think about ways that you can streamline your expenses, consider rolling over your 401k to an IRA, and consider rolling over your HSA to a new custodian. So I hope this was helpful. And like I said, better things are to come for anyone in this situation. Focus on what is in your control and look for those opportunities that will likely present themselves. So next week, hopefully I'll be publishing again from, we'll still be in Australia with the Slackers on this cruise ship. And I look forward to talking to you and you seeing this on YouTube in the near future. And again, I will be as diligent as possible in publishing these episodes, but please give me a little bit of grace if they do not come out on time as planned. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to this week's show. Please click follow on your favorite podcast player or subscribe on YouTube to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. Also, please leave a rating and review for the show. This helps improve the ranking and enables other like-minded people find the content in their podcast players. If you would like me to answer a question on the show, please send it to mark@marksmoneymind.com and put podcast question in the subject line. Let me know your first name, or let me know if you would like to remain anonymous, and also your state of residence if you choose. I would also appreciate it if you would recommend this show to friends and family that might benefit from this content. See you next week on the Mark's Money Mind Show. Until then, make some, save and invest, live on the rest. And now for the all-important disclaimer. This show is for education and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered investment, tax, or legal advice. Please consult the appropriate advisor or advisors before implementing anything you hear on this show or any other show for that matter. While I fully intend for everything on this show to be true and accurate at the time of each recording, occasionally errors may occur. So please do your own due diligence on anything discussed.